The soft hum of the air conditioning in my office was a comforting contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. My name is Elena, and I'm a 30-year-old attorney living in Chicago. On the surface, my life seems picture perfect. I have a successful career, a beautiful apartment, and a circle of friends who care about me. But beneath this facade lies a past filled with chaos and pain, a past I've kept hidden from everyone, even myself at times. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was buried in paperwork, my mind focused on the legal briefs spread out before me. The tranquility of my office was shattered by the ringing of my phone. I glanced at the caller ID, expecting it to be a client or a colleague, but instead, it was an unknown number. Something about it felt ominously familiar, sending a chill down my spine. With a hesitant hand, I answered the call. "Elena speaking," I said, trying to maintain my usual professional tone, though a sense of unease was creeping in. "Elena, it's your father," came the voice on the other end, laced with a nervousness that did nothing to calm my rising apprehension. I froze, the words echoing in my mind. My father, Robert, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A man who once symbolized love and protection, but had since become a source of betrayal and pain. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, sadness, all threatening to overwhelm me. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence that followed his introduction. "I'm in trouble, Elena. Financially. I need your help," he said, his voice cracking slightly. His plea, however sincere it might have sounded, ignited a fire of resentment within me. My help? Now, after all these years? After everything he'd done, or rather, hadn't done? My help? "You need me now," I retorted, disbelief and anger intermingling in my tone. "You stopped being my father a long time ago. Elena, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your dad," he said, a feeble attempt at rekindling a bond long extinguished. The word dad felt foreign, almost jarring. "A dad? You forfeited that title when you chose her over me," I said, years of suppressed anger and hurt finding their way into my words. "I thought," he began, but I cut him off, not wanting to hear his excuses. "You thought wrong. You made your choice years ago, and now I've made mine," I said firmly. There was a pause on the line, a heavy silence that felt like an unbridgeable chasm between us. I could hear him trying to find the right words, but I wasn't interested in hearing them. "Elena, I am sorry. I just need this one favor," he pleaded, but his words felt hollow. "Sorry doesn't change the past." "I can't help you," I stated firmly, and without waiting for his response, I hung up. The phone slipped from my hand, and I sat there in my office, numb. The past that I had tried so hard to bury had come rushing back with just one phone call. Memories of my childhood, of a time when everything was different, flooded my mind. Before the age of 10, my life was filled with love and laughter. My parents and I lived in a modest rented house in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. My mother, Sophia, was the heart of our home, a beacon of joy and kindness. She filled our days with warmth, our nights with stories, and our lives with love. My father, Robert, was once a playful and caring man. He would spend evenings playing games with me or teaching me little things about the world. Our home was a cocoon of happiness, where every day was an adventure and every night a sweet dream. But everything changed when my mother died unexpectedly. The house that had once echoed with laughter and love turned cold and empty. My father, the man who had once been my hero, seemed to lose himself in his grief. I tried to reach out to him, to find comfort in his presence, but he was distant, almost as if he had forgotten I existed. Then, just a few months after my mother's death, Robert brought Carla into our lives. Carla was a woman who would soon become the source of my nightmares. I still remember the day he introduced her to me. "Elena, this is Carla. She's going to be staying with us," my father announced one evening, his voice devoid of the warmth I was so accustomed to. I looked up at her, searching for a hint of motherly warmth or friendliness, but found none. Her presence was imposing, her gaze cold and calculating. From the very first moment, I sensed a change in the air, a shift that filled me with an unexplainable sense of dread. "Hello, Elena," Carla said, her voice smooth yet devoid of genuine emotion. Her smile, rather than comforting, seemed to hide something sinister beneath its surface. The days that followed were filled with unease. The cheerful memories of the past seemed to fade, replaced by a lingering tension that settled in every corner of our home. My father, blinded by his grief or perhaps his need to move on, didn't notice the change. Or maybe he did, but he chose to ignore it. And so, the happy childhood I once knew came to an end, replaced by a life filled with fear and uncertainty. The little girl who had once been surrounded by love and warmth was now left to navigate a world where the people she should have been able to trust the most had betrayed her. As I sat in my office, the weight of these memories pressing down on me, I realized that the wounds of the past were still fresh, still raw. The phone call from my father had ripped open those wounds, reminding me of the pain I had tried so hard to forget. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces once again. The days after Carla moved in were like stepping into a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The warmth that once filled our home vanished, replaced by a cold, oppressive atmosphere. Carla, who was supposed to bring comfort after the loss of my mother, instead brought darkness into our lives. I remember how everything changed so quickly. Carla wasn't interested in being a mother to me. In fact, she seemed to resent my very existence. Her words were sharp, her tone always laced with something bitter. At first, it was just small things, a dismissive comment here, a cold glance there, but soon, her hostility grew more blatant. "Elena, you've left your things all over the living room again," she would say, her voice dripping with annoyance. "You're old enough to clean up after yourself." I was only 10, still reeling from my mother's death, but there was no kindness or understanding in her voice. My father, Robert, would be nearby, but he never intervened. He would just sit there, lost in his own world, oblivious to the tension building between Carla and me. One morning, as I sat down for breakfast, I noticed my food tasted unusually salty. "Carla, did you put too much salt in this?" I asked hesitantly, trying not to sound accusatory. "Oh, did I? It must have been a mistake," she replied, her tone dismissive. "Just eat it, Elena. Don't be so picky." I forced myself to eat, even though the food was almost inedible. But it wasn't just the food. Small, spiteful incidents like this began to happen more frequently. My clothes would come out of the laundry faded or damaged, my school supplies would go missing, and every time I asked Carla about it, she would just shrug and offer a cold smile. "Maybe it's time you stop wearing such childish clothes," she'd say, as if that explained why my favorite dress was now unwearable. I felt a surge of frustration every time, but I knew arguing would only make things worse. So, I kept my mouth shut and tried to stay out of her way. But it was impossible to avoid her completely, and each day was a battle, trying to navigate around her hostility and my father's indifference. One evening, I gathered the courage to talk to my father. I had hoped he would understand, that he would finally see what was happening under his roof. "Dad, Carla is ruining my things. She's always mean to me," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. But his reaction was far from what I had hoped for. "Elena, you're imagining things. Carla is doing her best to fit into our family. "Stop causing trouble," he said sternly, not even looking up from his newspaper. "But, Dad," I tried to protest, but he cut me off. "That's enough, Elena. I don't want to hear any more of your accusations," he replied, his voice rising in anger. I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized I was truly alone. The one person I thought I could count on had turned his back on me. I retreated to my room, the only place in the house where I felt somewhat safe, and cried silently into my pillow. From that day on, I started spending more time in my room, trying to escape the constant tension that hung in the air. But even there, I wasn't completely safe. Carla's hostility escalated, and she began to lash out physically. It started subtly, a pinch on my arm, a twist on my wrist, but the pain was real, a cruel reminder of my helplessness. One day, while I was quietly reading in the living room, Carla walked in and, for no apparent reason, pinched my arm hard. Her nails dug into my skin, and I winced in pain, but I bit back any cry of protest. She looked at me with a cold, triumphant smirk before walking away, leaving me trembling in fear and anger. The days following were filled with dread. I developed strategies to avoid her, constantly alert to her whereabouts in the house. I would wait until she was occupied before I moved around, trying to stay as invisible as possible. But no matter how careful I was, there were times when she caught me off guard, and those moments always resulted in some form of pain. My life became a cycle of evasion and endurance. The house, once filled with my mother's laughter and love, now felt like a prison. I was trapped, living in constant fear of Carla's next move and feeling utterly abandoned by the one person who was supposed to protect me. As I lay in bed at night, I longed for the past, for the days when my mother was alive and everything was different. But those days were gone, and I was left to face this new reality alone. School became my only sanctuary, a place where I could escape the misery that awaited me at home. I would immerse myself in my studies, trying to lose myself in the world of books and learning. But even there, the shadows of my struggles at home began to seep through. My teacher, Ms. Carter, a kind-hearted woman who always encouraged her students, started to notice changes in me. One day, as I handed in my homework, she gently grabbed my wrist, her eyes drawn to the bruises on my arm. "Elena, what happened here? These look like bruises," she said, her voice filled with concern. I quickly pulled my arm back, covering the bruises with my sleeve. "It's nothing, Miss Carter. I fell while playing," I lied, avoiding her gaze. Ms. Carter didn't look convinced. "Elena, if there's something wrong, or if someone is hurting you, you can tell me. It's important to speak out," she urged, her eyes searching mine for the truth. I wanted to tell her everything, to confide in her about the nightmare that my life had become. But the words wouldn't come. The fear of what Carla might do if she found out I had told someone kept me silent. Instead, I forced a smile. "Really, Miss Carter, I'm fine. It was just a silly accident." She gave me a long, thoughtful look, then nodded slowly. "All right, Elena. But remember, my door is always open. You're not alone," she said, giving me a reassuring smile. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. Her kindness made it all the more difficult to maintain the facade that everything was all right. As I walked home that day, Ms. Carter's words echoed in my mind. I felt a mix of gratitude for her concern and a deep sense of loneliness from carrying my burdens alone. That evening, I was unusually quiet at dinner, lost in thought about Ms. Carter's offer to help. Carla noticed my silence and smirked. "Why so quiet tonight, Elena? Cat got your tongue?" she asked in her usual mocking tone. I just shook my head and continued eating, trying to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. I knew better than to engage with her. Any response could lead to more trouble. After dinner, as I lay in bed, the reality of my situation felt more overwhelming than ever. Miss Carter's concern had shown me that people did care, but the fear of what revealing the truth might bring kept me locked in silence. I was caught between the desperation to tell someone and the fear of Carla's retaliation, a balancing act that I navigated every day. The day Miss Carter decided to involve my father was one of the most terrifying days of my life. I was called to the principal's office, and there he was, Robert, my father, his face stern, his eyes filled with a mix of irritation and embarrassment. "What's this about, Elena? Why am I being called to your school like this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. My heart raced with fear. I glanced at Miss Carter, who gave me a nod of encouragement. Swallowing hard, I tried to find my voice. "Dad," Miss Carter saw the bruises. "She's worried about me," I stammered, feeling the weight of his gaze on me. Before I could say anything more, he interrupted, his anger palpable. "Bruises? What are you talking about? Are you making up stories again?" Ms. Carter stepped in, her tone firm yet calm. "Mr. Thompson, I'm concerned about Elena's well-being. The bruises on her arm don't seem accidental. We need to address this." His face darkened with anger. "She's perfectly safe at home. Elena, are you spreading lies about our family?" I felt the tears I had been holding back start to spill. "It's not lies, Dad. Carla, she's been hurting me." But his reaction was one of total disbelief. "Carla? That's ridiculous. She's been nothing but kind to you. I won't have you slandering her with these accusations." Desperate for him to believe me, I cried out, "But Dad, it's the truth." He stood up abruptly, his patience wearing thin. "Enough of this. Tell Miss Carter you made it all up." Defeated and broken, I turned to Miss Carter and, with tears streaming down my face, repeated the lie my father demanded. She nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow, but she didn't press further. When we got home, my father locked me in my room without another word. Through the door, I could hear Carla's voice, dripping with false concern. "I told you, she's just seeking attention." I sat on my bed, feeling a profound sense of isolation and despair. The one person I thought I could always count on had turned his back on me. The walls of my room, which had once been my safe haven, now felt like the walls of a prison. I realized that if I wanted to escape this nightmare, I would have to find a way out on my own. The days following my confinement were some of the darkest I had ever experienced. Trapped in my room, I felt utterly alone, my despair deepening with each passing hour. But amidst the darkness, a small flicker of hope remained. My grandmother, Martha. She was the only person left who might still care about me. One evening, when I was certain that Carla and my father were occupied, I mustered all the courage I had left and dialed my grandmother's number. My hands were shaking as I held the phone to my ear. "Hello," came her warm, familiar voice. "Grandma, it's me, Elena," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of my emotions. "Elena, my dear, how are you?" she asked, her tone filled with genuine care. Tears welled up in my eyes as I replied, "Grandma, I need help. Can I come and stay with you for a while?" There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then she spoke, her voice laced with concern. "What's wrong, Elena? Did something happen?" The words rushed out of me, a desperate plea for rescue. "It's Carla. She's been hurting me, and Dad won't believe me. I don't know what to do." My grandmother didn't hesitate. "Of course, my dear. You come right over. I'll take care of this." The next day, Martha arrived at our house. She was a small woman, but her presence filled the room with a strength and determination that surprised me. She confronted my father with a firmness I had never seen in her before. "John, I'm taking Elena with me," she declared, her voice unwavering. "She's not safe here." My father, taken aback, tried to protest. "Mom, you can't just take her. She's my daughter. Your daughter whom you've failed to protect, Martha countered sharply. I won't stand by and watch her suffer any longer. Carla tried to intervene, her voice shrill and defensive. She's just a child making up stories. You can't believe her over us. But my grandmother wasn't swayed. She turned to Carla, her eyes steely. I know a scared child when I see one. Elena is coming with me, and if you try to stop me, I'll take this matter to the authorities. Realizing they were defeated, my father and Carla didn't put up any further resistance. As I gathered my things, I saw Carla's expression change from defiant to defeated. Leaving the house with my grandmother, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt safe. The car ride to my grandmother's house was quiet, but her presence was comforting. When we arrived, she turned to me and said, "You're safe now, Elena. You don't have to worry anymore." Living with my grandmother was a healing experience. Her home became a sanctuary where I could breathe again, free from the fear and anxiety that had plagued me for so long. Over time, I regained my strength and began to heal, finding peace in the love and security she provided. Years later, when my grandmother passed away, I faced my father and Carla once more. They came to the funeral, their faces a mix of feigned sorrow and poorly disguised eagerness. But this time, I was not the frightened child they once controlled. After the funeral, as they tried to assert their claim over my grandmother's house and assets, I revealed the truth. Grandma left everything to me, I said calmly. I'm 18 now. Legally, I'm in charge of my own life. Their shock quickly turned to anger, and then to desperate pleading. But I stood firm. This is my house now. You'll need to find somewhere else to live. As they left, the echoes of the past, the pain, the fear, the betrayal, began to fade. Standing in the house that was now mine, I felt a sense of closure I had long sought. The journey had been long and painful, but I had found my strength. I had found my healing. And now, I was ready to start a new chapter in my life, free from the shadows of my past.